I'd like to bring onto the rostrum David Tropp Hag. David has more than 20 years experience with KVH, and I'm sure he will be discussing a lot of things about communications and technology. David?
Thank you, George. Is this my clicker? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me. CSN, thank you for arranging the conference and inviting me here. And thank you to our esteemed audience for participating. Thank you to the sponsors. I have the privilege and honor of looking a little bit into the future and see if I can guess what is coming. Hopefully we have a good idea as one of the major satellite operators. As George said, I'm Vice President of Sales for EMEA region with KVH. Been with the company for a little more than 20 years now, so a long time already. Excuse me. One of these. And the topic today is to look at all the next generation satellite constellations that are coming down the pipe and what they will offer, what trends we see, and how it will impact connectivity on vessels. It's a lot of guesswork, I guess, because there's very little known, but we will try to pull together what we know. Here's how I plan to structure the presentation. We'll look a little bit about the development in demands for connectivity on the vessels. Then a quick overview of what is coming, what are the next generation satellite constellations and services out there, what are the potential benefits of these to shipping, and finally, is there a good match for these services? So let's start by looking at the demand for connectivity. I think there's no surprise to everybody that there is a huge increase in data use on all sorts of vessels. Inmarsat has recently launched a report that suggests these percentages increase in data use. We see vessels using 80, 100, 200, 250, 300 gigabytes per month, very different from operational patterns, of course, and types of vessels. But no matter what type of vessel, the increase is significant. We see the continued increase coming from all areas of the ship's operation. Could be the business side, could be the crew side, and of course IoT and smart shipping applications continue to grow also. Probably the segment that's growing fastest, not the biggest one, but the one growing fastest. So looking a little bit of each of these. The business needs are continuing to grow. Communication is crucial and critical for the vessel. And the mix of applications and use cases are both high bandwidth and low bandwidth. Of course, the growth coming from the new fancy things you can do with video conferencing, live surveillance, cloud computing, AI-assisted navigation, and funky things like that. This all requires more data. But the backbone of communication on the vessel is still email and voice and online forms and things like that. And those are fairly low bandwidth. That's not where the growth is coming from. On the other hand, the crew data is only going one direction, obviously. This is probably the biggest, well, 100% the biggest user of the data on board the vessel. Crew needs to and wants to stay connected to home. And now it's even mandated in the MLC latest revision that it has to be available. Previously, it was very soft language. It should be made available, if possible, at reasonable cost. Now it has to be made available, but still there is a chance that you can charge for it at a reasonable cost. Of course, like our own social lives, the crew is using the data on social media, video streaming, and entertainment services, as well as running their lives. I mean, banking, insurance, stuff like that also needs to happen when you're sailing. And finally, the third category I mentioned is the smart shipping. This is not about that, so I'm just going to mention a few of the things that we see. Of course, sensor data needs to be transferred in increasing volumes, but we also see, and especially we saw that growing through the pandemic, that remote monitoring and remote surveys were being used and utilized, because then you could save travel, you could have a lot more flexibility on getting on board and doing something if you did it virtually. So cost savings, flexibility, but higher requirements on the connectivity side. Today, we meet these demands and these growing demands by a combination of different solutions. KU, Ka band is the primary carrier for this data, and this migration from L-band, primarily fleet broadband, some Iridium services, has been accelerating in the recent years. But increasingly, even KU and Ka band is not enough. We also see more and more people installing LTE, 4G, 5G solutions to offload the VSAT when they're on the coastal coverage. And here is a typical example of a customer setup where they would have a primary carrier being the VSAT. This would carry all traffic when available. But then they have an alternative primary. It's not a secondary. It's actually the primary when it gets into coverage of cellular coverage. And this will do a lot of heavy lifting on database synchronization, sending safety manuals and things like that, that doesn't have a time-critical element, but still needs to be done. And finally, we continue to have backup with the L-band, either Iridium or fleet broadband, and that's probably not going to go away, because security is also a very important thing still. So quick 5 reasons. Why do ship owners choose these solutions? Because they are robust, because they have a fallback option in all cases. They choose solutions that are seamless, so they don't have to worry about being online. They don't have to mess around with it on board. They want something that is always giving you the fastest service available. It needs to be easy, convenient for the crew, for the master to manage. And it needs to do this selection in an intelligent way. So it's not just I picked the cell carrier because I can see there is one, but in fact it's a horrible connection and you can't pass any data. It has to actually measure the quality of the link. So those are the criteria. But for this session, we'll focus on the satellite trends. That continues to be the only option in the deep sea, and therefore the most robust service for shipping. But this technology is changing a lot, as I'm sure you all know. The geostationary satellites, the ones 36,000 kilometers in the sky, primarily KU, Ka band, but also still C-band and lots of L-band, are the main workhorses. And there are massive investments in this constellation, or in this orbital location also. So when we hear all the hype about LEO and MEO, it's important to remember that GEO is also being heavily invested in and will probably be competitive on a price per megabit level in the coming years. But then, of course, all the hype is about the non-geostationary satellites that are coming. And here we have different orbital locations. Honestly, it doesn't matter too much to the owners where the satellites are, as long as they provide good service at a reasonable price. But these are the technical nuances of it. LEO is the closest to Earth, MEO is somewhere in the middle, and GEO is the furthest away. So that's what we're looking at. And what do we see in this area? Well, we see a lot of things coming, changing. Here's some news clips from the last week. Marlink and OneWeb partnering for the first trial of OneWeb on a vessel. Eutelsat launching a new 500 gigabits per second satellite this week. Speedcast signing up to be a Starlink reseller. So things are happening at a very rapid pace these days, and it will probably continue to be like that in the next, I guess, 6 months till things are falling a little bit into place. But let's have a look at a couple of the operators that I've mentioned here and the ones that are most near term. OneWeb, absolutely one of the key players in the LEO market or MEO market. They have a constellation of 648 satellites planned, 428 has been put up to date, and 5 more launches are planned in the next 6 to 8 months. The total capacity of the OneWeb constellation with the Generation 1 satellites is 1.1 terabit per second. So there's a lot of capacity there. Remember I mentioned that Eutelsat just launched one satellite with 500 gigabits per second capacity. That's why I was saying earlier, the price per megabit is probably not going to be the differentiating factor. Something else will. From what I see and hear and read from analysts, OneWeb will be offering up to 200 megabits per second services, but most likely the packages they will be presenting to the maritime market will be somewhat lower because otherwise it would be unpayable, probably in the 10 to 100 megabit per second range. And what we hear is that they will be volume based. So you will buy a package of data, maybe you will buy 100 gigabytes, 500 gigabytes. Let's see how they package it. That's going to be very interesting to see. There has been a whole string of press releases from OneWeb and partners that they've signed up in the past year. Marlink, Speedcast, AST, just to mention a few. Pivotel, Telespazio. So they look to be focusing on having a traditional reseller strategy, meaning that as owners and operators, you will be able to contact your usual service providers, and they will offer an integrated solution comprising also OneWeb. Then the big elephant in the room these days is Starlink. Everybody's talking about it. And you probably know these numbers just as well as I do. They have a 12,000 satellite constellation planned on KU band. I think they've applied for up to 40,000 on the FCC. I'm not 100% sure those approvals have been granted yet. But they have 2,500 of these satellites up already. And since January 1st, somewhere in January this year, they started launching the second generation of their satellites. And this is significant for maritime because the first generation of satellites could not talk to each other. They only had the ability to take signal from an Earth station and pass it up and down. So they would not have coverage in the deep sea because simply they would not be able to pass off the signal to an Earth station in the deep sea. So the first generation satellites would only give coastal coverage. The next generation that has started launching since January will have the inter-satellite connectivity and will be able to provide coverage deeper into the ocean. Each individual satellite has 2 gigabits per second connectivity or capacity. So I read an interesting calculation from an analyst saying that with 100 megabits per second and a 100-to-1 contention ratio, I'm not sure how anyone can live with that, but on the other hand, maybe that's the package they will be providing. They would be able to support 25 million users, which is a nice number. But when you consider the markets they address, it's billions of people, private households, and things like that. So it remains to be seen exactly how they will go to markets, but it will certainly be interesting. We see little signs of it. No published CIRs, so no guaranteed bandwidth, no minimum speeds. We see that they have just a couple of months ago introduced data caps on private users. So if you go over a certain limit, you will be reduced in speed. That was in France on public announcement. And from what we hear, because lots of shipping companies have bought their own system, also antenna manufacturers have bought their own system, testing it, playing around with it, and we see typically 50 to 100 megabits per second, which is fantastic speed. As soon as you put it on a motion table and simulate Inmarsat motion specs, for example, the speed drops significantly to 10 to 15 megabits per second. This is with the current antennas. We don't know what is coming. There are rumors of a maritime terminal, but we will have to wait and see how that looks and what the cost is. Right now, there is an enterprise terminal consisting of 2 flat panel antennas like that, and it's a $10,000 package. Very easy to set up, 10 minutes and you're running. So there's certainly something to be afraid of if you're an installer on that. But Starlink originally at least was a business to consumer model. You go to a web portal, order your stuff, and you get it. You have an app, you can control everything yourself. I'm sure that would remain. That will not remain in place for the marine market. They will have to have resellers, like they have just announced Speedcast. We expect they will be announcing a couple more in this near future. And it'll be very interesting to see who ends up being resellers of Starlink in the near future. This is their coverage map. As you can see, the light blue is the coastal coverage that they can provide today. Then the middle blue is what they're expecting to be able to offer here towards the end of the year. And then the dark blue areas is what they expect to be able to offer next year. So that's the view on Starlink. Sorry? It's not truly global, no, not yet. Then I started looking at all the other projects that are out there, but to be honest, many of them are so far away in the future, they don't even have funding or FCC licenses in place. So I put a few of them here with some overview data, and you will have the presentation afterwards. But the next couple of years, they will not be relevant for the maritime industry, at least the first three. But the bottom two are actually interesting, because Viasat and Inmarsat are launching, both the GX 7, 8, and 9 satellites, but also the Viasat 3 constellation. And these birds are massive. I mean, they are enormous. If I told you that the Eutelsat one went up this week was 500 gigabits per second, the Viasat 3 satellites are 1 terabyte or terabit per second. Remember that the entire OneWeb constellation is 1.1 terabit. So Viasat is launching 4 of these. Intelsat has 11 satellites on order. They're coming up with what they call software-defined satellites. Actually, they're not coming up with it. The GX 7, 8, and 9 are also software-defined satellites. Some of the Certus satellites are kind of. But what that means is that you can change the coverage, you can change the density of power, you can change the footprints, you can change all the parameters from shore through a portal instead of having to launch new satellites. And it will bring a tremendous amount of capacity to the market, also from the geo operators. So that's interesting to remember. So perhaps this slide should have been not NGSO potential benefits, but new constellation potential benefits. Lower latency is the only real differentiator you have on the low Earth orbit satellites. Because they're closer to Earth, the signal doesn't have to travel so far, so you get much lower latency. Originally, people like myself would try to write that off and say, nah, it's not important, it's only for gamers and for high-speed stock market trading and things like that. But when we talk to our customers, they tell us, no, it's actually important. It's important for cloud-based applications, when you want to run Citrix environment, if you want to run video conferencing. Not that video conferencing can't be done on geo, but when you have the experience, you've probably all done more than enough Zoom in the last couple of years and Teams. You know that the picture comes on and it pixelates at first, and it gets sharper and sharper. You don't have that problem with low latency, you just have the picture. So, of course, there are enterprise reasons to go for LEO satellite constellations if low latency is your concern. So the next one is more for everybody. All the constellations will offer more bandwidth, significant advances. I mean, when I look at Intelsat, who is our main provider, the graph for their bandwidth growth, it will double from last year to 25, and then after 25 will explode, because they're also coming up with mid-Earth orbit satellites. So there is so much bandwidth coming online in the next couple of years that I think there's one thing that's certain, that prices will go down for bandwidth, which is, I mean, a good thing for shipping. Yeah. Another thing that could be interesting is the cost of the equipment itself over the lifetime of an installation. Maybe not the biggest concern, but when you look at a new acquisition, it is something that comes to mind also. At least what we see now. For Starlink, it's very cheap equipment, but if it comes up as a new stabilized antenna, perhaps it's not so cheap anymore. I've not seen the price points on the OneWeb. Perhaps somebody can tell me here afterwards. But as far as I know, it's a dual antenna installation from Intellian, Only, you know, George? Yeah, yeah. Okay, so maybe half price of a KU band installation. Okay. So that is sort of the quick overview. It's not hugely detailed or deep, but I'm happy to chat with anyone afterwards for more information as far as I can give it. But is it a good match for maritime? Well, I think the promise is interesting. So here's a promise. I don't know if anyone can guess which provider this is. This is Fleet Express. When they were about to launch in 2014. So I would say half of the statement is true. They have brought cheaper bandwidth. They have brought smaller terminals. Not quite 50 megabits per second, not quite iPad size. So I think also with Starlink, with OneWeb, with other services like those, we need to see the service active. We need to see the rate sheets. We need to see the activation forms and the small print before anyone can say what kind of role these solutions will play in maritime. As I mentioned, some applications will definitely benefit from low latency. And as mentioned also, the availability of so much more bandwidth will absolutely push down the price per megabit per second. So it should mean lower costs or more bandwidth for the same price, which would be our preference, obviously. But the way we see it, from the rumors and from what we know today about robustness packages, we see this as being probably a supplementary service to KU-Ka band. We think this will remain as the primary carrier for at least the foreseeable future, because it is based on very reliable technology, proven performance, things that shipping usually values very high. And we've worked many years on getting regulatory clearances in place for service in India and China, in Brazil, in Mexico, and I don't know how many years it will be before the other guys have this in place. So if we look at the graph or the table I showed before, this is how I envision it could be in the future. Still a primary carrier on KU or Ka band, but with a new alternative primary being a high bandwidth system. Perhaps the KU-Ka band subscription is now not the biggest part of the subscription. Maybe the high bandwidth solution is the biggest part, and you use that for your main data configurations. But still, maybe you run your mail servers, maybe you run your voice lines and things like that over KU band. Still have secondary backups in terms of cell coverage, because in some countries this will still be cheaper than GEO or NGSO. And I suspect backups will still be needed also with the L-band systems. So that's a possible configuration of a future ship. So a very few words on how KVH do this and what we have brought to market in the past 2 or 3 months, very recently. Our look or our take on hybrid is we will integrate it all in one antenna. Not NGSO, but we have launched a new series of antennas that combine cellular service, Wi-Fi service, and KU band service. Have it all into one. We offer the service of both KU band and cellular, and we have an intelligent middleware solution that switches intelligently between these services based on latency, jitter, packet loss, signal strength, not just availability of the signal. So an intelligent solution. How do you think I can play the video here, or? I don't know how. Oh, it's a web. Oh, I think you can just press play, Mr. DJ. Not playing? We leave it? Okay, never mind. Okay. It's just a graphical representation of what I just said. Thank you. Are we back on the presentation? Okay. So, last one, quickly. We offer these solutions, as you may know already, as agile plans, which means a single monthly fee, give you rental of equipment, airtime, warranty, spare parts, maintenance, everything covered, so total cost of ownership in a single monthly fee. All costs known in advance. Yeah, let me know if you're interested in talking about this, and thank you very much for hosting us. Enjoy the rest of the conference.